Okay, you guys, let's do this. It's going to be so professional. Like, so professional. Here we go. Well, welcome to the Live Support Podcast with your hosts, Michelle Van Dusen and June Colson, a couple of clean comedians who support each other and others through comedy's wacky and winding roads. I hope you're ready. Get set. Let's go. Since podcasts have a catchy tune, we wrote this song for Michelle and June. Clean comedians are best friends too. Oh, so good. And you never know what they'll say or do. Here we go, sing with me on Live Support, with Michelle who's really short. We'll have a ball, with June who's really tall. They have fun, interviewing comedians on Live Support, with Michelle who's really short. Now it's time to start Live Support.
The Live Support Podcast is brought to you by the Hot Breath Comedy Network.
Wow, here's all a round of applause. Woo! That was magic. Welcome to the award-winning Laugh Support Podcast. I'm your host, June Bug Colson, here with my best friend, Michelle with one L, Trisha's sister, Rhonda Colson, Corey's friend, Morgan's little sister. Don't call me Shelly, Michelle Van Dusen. She's here. How are we doing, Van Dusen?
Oh, good. It's been very hot this summer, and that's not been good. You know, I'm just sitting under a fan the whole time. At least I've got some large, I got a lot of fans. That's all I'm saying. They're in my house, all pointed at me, but I have a lot of fans.
Michelle, you just started the conversation with my son's biggest pet peeve.
Oh, yeah?
The weather. Yeah. I remember one time sitting in a room of adults and everybody was talking about like their medical conditions and the weather and all of that. And he was very polite. It was probably like some church group that came to the house or something. I'm not sure. And when everybody left, he goes, "That's it? Like, that's all I have to look forward to." That had to be the most boring hour of my life. You talked about weather and your medications. He's like, "Please, God, don't let me grow old."
Well, I'm not on any medications, so there you go. Maybe I should be. I don't know.
I was gonna say, I'm not sure that that's a brag, because maybe, Michelle, maybe you wouldn't need all those fans if you had, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I'm not looking forward to winter, but I am looking forward to fall. I love the fall season because it's not too hot, not too cold. But winter, you never know. I mean, sure, it hasn't snowed here in like years, but when it does, it is so much snow and ice, and it shuts everything down. So,
yeah. I know Tulsa is known for its many blizzards. And I'm sure that I have seen you lay on the beach with your porcelain skin and nearly disappear into the sand. So I'm sure that for someone like you, to go to the mailbox in a snowdrift could be dangerous. Like, they wouldn't find you till the fall, Michelle.
You think I'm short now. It's like, whoop. Me and the gnomes.
It is though, man. We're doing that transition. We're getting into, the changes in weather. Speaking of weather and medications, everybody's allergies are up. I sound like a snuffleupagus, so I apologize to our listeners, but this is probably going to be me for the next 4 or 5 episodes. Oh no. And I hope not to choke to death once our guest comes on, but if I disappear, it's because I went to put ginger in my tea to try and clear up my head. And the spoon section was open, not the sprinkle. And so I poured so much ginger into this tea, but it's too late. We're trying to stay on schedule. So we'll see what happens.
What kind of tea do you typically drink?
I have throat coat and breathe right.
Okay, so you're doing 2. I have mint melody and throat coat. I like the combination of the 2. Kind of wakes you up and soothes you at the same time. But I don't add ginger or honey or lemon or any of that kind of stuff because throat coat covers it all, which I love. Not a sponsor. But
yeah, it's good that we're spending so much time talking about throat coat that will never give us a dime for our podcast. That's okay.
Not a sponsor, but I do enjoy the combination of 2 at a time. So
Yeah.
that's all I'm saying. 2 different teas in one. That's all.
Nice. So
Kind
real
of like
quick,
an Arnold Palmer
yeah,
iced tea
okay.
and lemonade. What? Okay.
Gotcha. So real quick before we pull our guest up.
Yeah.
So super excited. I'm not sure if this will air before or after, but you have been accepted on another tour. Rhonda, Corey, and I always joke that it's like, if there's a tour, Michelle's on it. We're like, you've been on the Unknown tour, you've been on the Funny Together tour, there was another tour before that. Now this tour, tell us about it real quick.
It's Moms Unhinged, and
See,
it's going to
you
be.
don't even have to say more.
Yeah.
I fully understand why you're on it.
All right, typecasting.
How were you not already on it? How were you not the founder of this tour? But go ahead, Moms Unhinged.
No, the tour that I started was She Can Laugh, and so I did that one first, and we had several shows. We did a lot of outreach shows, which was a lot of fun. Like day centers and homeless shelters and things like that. So that was really cool.
Yeah.
Okay, what was the question?
So I said, just tell us a little bit about it and when you're going to be on.
Oh, okay. So I have I've got 2 shows. I got one in Enid, Oklahoma, and I've got one in Texas, and I'm really excited about it. So I think this will definitely air way after they've already happened. So I had a great time. They were so much fun. Stacey Peterson is the bomb, and blah blah blah, so on and so forth. Loved it.
You crushed it. You killed it. They loved you. Yeah. People were falling over in the aisles crying. So we're gonna yeah. You know what? Later on in our tip, what if is going to be the tip today. What if? And we'll come back to that. But in the meantime, we have a very, very, very important guest that's waiting backstage, eating all of our snacks in the green room because that's just how he does. Tell us, Michelle, who's on the show today?
Okay, so our guest was named World's Funniest Cop in 2001. That's right. He's a cop turned comedian who headlines comedy clubs nationwide. He tours with Killer Bees. He performs regularly at Zanies in Nashville. He's appeared on The Huckabee Show, Circle TV, the syndicated Bob and Tom radio show. Soon, he's going to be featured on the Comedy Buzz on Amazon Prime. So prepare yourself for some lawful laughs. Let's welcome to the Laugh Support Podcast, the Sergeant of Silliness, Dan Whitehurst. Woo, woo, woo,
woo. Hey, June and Michelle.
There he is, Dan Whitehurst. Dan in all his bearded glory. Dan, we're just going to start with you telling us about the beard.
Well, I've had a little bit of a beard, a goatee ever since I left the police department. Because I couldn't have one back then where I worked, so I just had to grow one. But recently I talked to William Lee Golden from the Oak Ridge Boys. And of course I had to comment on his beard because it's really long. And I asked him how long it took to grow it that long. And he said it grew 3 years and it never grew after that. He's never trimmed it, never did anything. Wow. So we kind of came up with the theory that a beard will grow about 3 years. So wherever it is in 3 years, that's all you're going to get. And the competitive part of me started wondering if I could outbeard William Lee Golden in 3 So this is about 9 months, maybe 8 months. So
wow. I would say, I don't know. Do you know how long? Have you measured how far it's grown?
I have not. I'm just going to wait until I got 3 years in, then I'm going to shave it off and donate it to Beards for Love.
Of course, Michelle has a what is that? A rular?
It's a ruler. Yeah. It looks about 6 inches.
Measure from there.
Mine from last night is about a half an inch. I'm at that age.
Is that right? Is that right? Well, we didn't bring you on to talk about the beard, but it is a beautiful white beard. The people who are listening to our podcast, you got to make sure that you're watching us on YouTube as well. That's amazing. First of all, I think you're going to have the most epic beard because it's competitive with one of the most epic country music group, connected to the most epic country music groups of all time, the Oak Ridge Boys. The last time that I did the Huckabee show like did warm up. It was a crazy experience, and there was a music artist, and they weren't coming out, and they ended up like yelling. The producer was like being yelled at in her ear, "Go get the comedian, get the comedian!" And they suddenly just threw me out when I wasn't expected to be out there.
Right.
And then they like shooed me off the stage, and then they're like, "Go do it again!" And it was just this crazy experience. But the whole time, I believe it is your friend from the Oak Ridge Boys. He was sitting on the front row, and he was just smiling the sweetest smile. Like I felt like I was his niece or something. Like, they appointed them out, and the audience was so excited that they were there. But like all his bearded glory, they were in the front row. This was back in February.
Okay.
And I remember thinking that was the most bizarre experience ever, because like I listened to the Oak Ridge Boys we grew up really poor, so we didn't get to go buy cassette tapes and records and things like that, but Dad smoked Marlboros, and so Marlboro miles you could use to buy the Marlboro country cassette tapes. The Oak Ridge Boys were always on there, so while my brain is trying to do comedy, all I could think about was like how many Marlboro miles it took for me to listen to their music, as he's smiling on the front row. It's so bizarre.
Yeah, he's a really nice man. William Lee Golden is a very nice man.
That's pretty awesome. That's pretty awesome. Well, okay, so Dan, we told you before the show, laugh support is what we call the show. Michelle always says, no matter how I say it, it still sounds like life support. But we are saying laugh, Laugh, laugh support. And I know that, well, Michelle said 2001 was when you were voted America's funniest police officer. So we know that you've at least been doing comedy since 2001. So when you think back to the beginning of your comedy career, can you think of someone or some people who maybe came alongside you and were there for you when you first started doing stand-up comedy?
Yeah, when I first started, I actually saw a letter to the editor, whatever it is, in the Nashville scene. Somebody was starting a stand-up comedy writers group. And that was the first time I ever thought about doing comedy. And I thought, I'd like to try that just because I'm always thinking of things I find funny. So I met up with them. They were meeting once a week, I think, one night, and they just sit around and write. And I started with a bunch of guys and girls that they were brand new too. We were all brand new, but we would kind of write jokes and kind of read them to each other and help each other write them. And so I never really was, just coming out on my own. I always had somebody helping me. Let's see, it was probably this was in either late 98 or early 99. And there weren't very many stand-up comedians in Nashville at that time. You had Keith Alberstadt and Tim Northern, Joby Sad, and maybe a few more that started before us. But they all wound up coming in and doing open mics with us later. And but that's what we would do. And a guy named Landon Lyon, who's a good friend of mine, he was doing comedy then. And what me and him used to do is we would write 5 jokes once a week. We would write 5 jokes and we would email them to each other. And then whoever got the jokes would read them, and they would rate them in the order of best to worst. So neither one of us had to say, hey, that one's terrible. You just put them, you rated them how you thought they would go. And we did that a lot. And I wound up getting quite a bit of material from that period just doing that. I probably need to start doing it again. So I had a lot of those people helping me. And then Janet Williams, she was the first comedian to take me out on the road, the Tennessee Tramp. And she kind of showed me the in and outs of comedy and, etiquette and what not to do and what to do in comedy rooms. And that was very helpful. And we worked together for several years. I was blessed to get to work with Ralphie May, and he was probably one of my bigger influences at the time because I was a one-liner comedian. I loved one-liner comedy. I liked Stephen Wright, like Mitch Hedberg, and I guess I would try to emulate what they did. And that's the way I did comedy the first few years up until I started working with Ralphie May. And he said, you're leaving too much meat on the bone, is what he was saying. There's more you can get out, because I was just doing one-liners. So I slowly started stringing one-liners together and making them into more story form. And before I knew it, somebody described me as a storytelling comedian, which struck me as odd because I still didn't consider myself storytelling. I just felt like they were longer one-liners with more punches in it.
You know, I just, Michelle, I just recently got to do a show with Dan for a theater full of firefighters. And you want to sacrifice a police officer, throw him out in front of a bunch of firefighters. The first thing they did was boo when I introduced him. But I love this. Dan did not miss a beat. He went straight to a great joke that just played off of that. And the guy in the front, they weren't being disrespectful. The guy, like, he, you know, sometimes people are just, they think they're funny and they're caught up in the moment and like they had the moment. But when I tell you, Dan ripped the room apart. Like, he had them from the second he came out. And I'm around firefighters all the time. I just had dinner with like 6 of them that were at the show that night. They were just going on about how much fun they had, how much they loved hearing Dan, and like they just had a great time. But what I was going to say is, when you said you started out as one-liners, that does surprise me, because Johnny W finished out the show for us. And I got to sit and watch Johnny just losing it as Dan's doing his material. And I know Johnny's heard Dan do, material before, but direct quote, Johnny said, Dan is one of my favorite storytellers of all time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's nice. Very nice.
But I think that's why your stories are so good, because they're not long-winded like me. You started out with these chunks of just one line, and I think that's what makes a great story, is when you're able to masterfully, which is what you do, put together the one-liners that's now in a beginning, middle, and end, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, Johnny's great. I got to do the bees thing with him in Huntsville. I wasn't on the actual show that time. I was doing the check drop part of the show. Yeah. And but I got to watch everybody, and it was a good time. Very good time.
That's awesome. Michelle, do you think I could start doing that, like writing the 5 jokes and send it to you, and you would not comment? You would just place them in order the way that Dan and his friend did?
Yeah, I'm just curious, can the order just be 5, 5, 5, 5? Or I'm sorry. Okay. Actually, Dan, for our listeners, some of them might not know what it means that you said you were the check drop. Will you explain a little bit what that is?
Sure. When there's a competition or a televised thing like what we were doing, you want everybody to have the exact same equal opportunity. So nobody really goes first. You'll have a comedian come up, and he's the warm-up guy. So he's going to try to get everybody situated. Plus, the waitresses are bringing people food. The servers are bringing food and drinks. And you don't really want a whole lot of that going on during the show. So you've got an opening comic that's not going to be a part of the actual televised part of the show or competition, if that's what it is, but he'll warm the crowd up. The check drop portion is, you don't really want a comedian on stage competing or doing a televised spot while the checks are being dropped during the show, because it is a bit of a distraction. So you just have one comic come out and fill that particular time slot. I've always felt, and I love to middle. It's a great, you're not the star, you're not getting paid as much, but you don't have the initial people ordering food nearly as much, and you don't have the check drop. It's just comedy. There's no real distractions in the middle spot, because the headliner has got to deal with the check drop, and most of them have a particular bit they do that doesn't require 100% concentration to figure it out. Something more simple, so people can maybe miss a few words of it as they're reading their bill or whatever, and it still works. So they put a check drop person in the televised or competition parts, just so nobody else has to deal with it, basically.
Oh, I love that. Like that. That's really smart. Now I'm just curious. Now I'm curious as to when that started and how they knew when to do that. Anyway, but that'll be some history later on.
No, I think I don't know that I've ever paid attention to that. So that's the next time I'm at the comedy club, I'm definitely going to be paying attention to what they're doing, what the headliner's doing. Cause I'm more of a middle person. I'm a middle child. I'm kind of like you though. I love the middle spot. Like that's my favorite place to be. But I love the fact that like I haven't, as comedians, we're always trying to deconstruct what's going on stage and paying attention. And you're like trying to outthink the comedian who's doing the joke. You're thinking like, where are they going with it? And now I'm like, I've never noticed that they're potentially doing something during check drop that is less attention, or focus needed for that. That's really cool. That's super cool. So you talked about Janet Williams, is that right?
Janet Williams, yes. So she goes by the Tennessee Tramp.
Well, you said that she kind of showed you some ins and outs. So our episodes before this, we actually had a panel discussion with a couple of other comedians, and two things that we talked about. One was surviving a bomb, and then the other was green room etiquette. And I wondered, if there was something, because we talked about some people trying to perform in the green room, or being too talkative, or stealing the snacks, so I wonder, when she was kind of showing you the ropes, was there anything that like you learned right away that was a no-no, or like something you should be doing?
I know, like emceeing a show, hosting a show, you don't want to do any material after the headliner. I learned that. And I think I was told that before, because I don't believe I ever did it. But sometimes here in America anyway, the headliner, once he's done, that's the end of the jokes. The MC goes up, thanks the crowd for coming out, does all that. And something else I was taught, Brian Dorfman told me this, is you want the show to end on a high note. So what I started doing, instead of coming up and saying, just big round of applause for your headliner, one more time for your headliner, or whatever, and then thank them for coming out, remind them to tip the wait staff, blah, blah, blah. And then ending the show, I would come up and, remind them to tip the wait staff, thank them for coming out, tell them who's coming up, and then one more big hand for whoever, and the big applause, and then thank you, good night, walk off stage. So that way it ends the show on a high note. That was something I learned early.
I saw the light bulb go on, Michelle. Both of us were like, it's the little stuff. It's the little details that you learn.
I've never heard that before. Like, this is the first time I'm ever hearing end with a round of applause. Like, that makes so much sense.
Yeah.
So much sense. So thank you. Thank you. Like, I'm done now. I'm good.
Yeah, Brian Dorfman knows quite a bit about comedy. He's owned Zanies since '84, I think, or ran it. But yeah, he knows, and that made a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So Dan, you've been on this journey for a while, right? You had your writers group that you got to start with. You definitely didn't have to start alone. You had someone to bounce jokes off of.
Right.
I know that you actively do shows consistently with Killer Bees. I wonder now, like where you are in your comedy career, and if you still have some people from that group in your life, or do you have a different type of laugh support now?
I still have some of them, but people like Keith Alberstadt, he was a good friend, but he moved to New York and still living in New York, doing well. So, uh, and Dusty Slay, he's been super helpful to me. He actually, I mean, I knew Dusty was going to be a hit because you just couldn't help but like the guy, and he's so funny. But he put together made me a YouTube channel and stuff, which I never mess with. I need somebody that's really good with technology things. I'm just not very computer literate, but yeah, Dusty, he was very helpful on the internet parts of comedy, which is an important thing. But once people blow up that big, I always feel like I'm bothering them, so I don't call them. So I don't really fall out with anybody. We just don't communicate as much because they get so busy, family and comedy and traveling everywhere. But uh, I still try to get out and see shows with other comedians every now and then. When I first started, that was one of the big things I would do is I would go to comedy shows all the time. And sometimes I'd go like to Zany's and see the same guy twice.
Yeah.
And the more I watched comedy, the more it made me start looking for the funny in any situation. Because there are situations that there isn't anything funny about it, but I still kind of look for it just because I don't know. I just find myself looking at the more I watch comedy, the more, if I'm busy doing comedy, working a lot, I start doing that. I'm always thinking, is there anything funny about this? A lot of times there's not, but every now and then something is, and that's how I get my material most of the time. I don't just sit down and think I'm going to sit here and write jokes. I did when I was doing the 5 joke thing with Landon, but now it's more just things happen. I try to figure out a way to make it funny.
So how did you get connected with Killer Bees? I know I've seen you a couple times doing shows with him. How did that friendship begin? And do you continue to do shows with him?
Oh, absolutely. I love it. Just did one this past weekend in Philadelphia, Mississippi. But I probably worked with Bees the first time in, I don't know what year, it was the early 2000s. I do know it was the 25th anniversary of Elvis Presley's passing. I remember that because I had a joke about opening for Bees on the 25th anniversary of Elvis's passing and saying, ladies and gentlemen, today has been 25 years since the passing of the king. And a guy from Pegram sitting right up front said, Jerry Lawler's dead. That probably wouldn't work nowadays because nobody knows who Jerry Lawler is, but 20 years ago they did.
Yes. Yes. I almost wore my I went to the Huckabee show the other day and it was an Elvis Presley night and I almost wore my Elvis t-shirt today. I totally missed the opportunity to be relevant to your story. So, but I feel like you're such an amazing fit with him. Like the audience, I guess maybe I'll ask you about this. I think a lot of times you'll see comedians get frustrated because they don't know who their audience is yet. Mm-hmm. And they go out and they have great material. It's just not it really isn't the right room for them. And when you find that fit, it just makes sense. And I feel like I got to watch you do a show at a theater in Kentucky with Bees, and I got to see you in Alabama, I think, with him as well. And it's just such a good fit. The folks who really love him, they really love you and your style and your comedy. Am I right?
Yeah, he's older. His crowd is older, so they get a lot of my references, and I just absolutely love his crowds. Tim Wilson's was the same way. James Gregory's, and when I first started, Tim Wilson, Killer Bees, and James Gregory were the three big hitters in the Southeast, and I was very blessed to get to work with all of them, and I've just always really liked their crowds. They're, like I said, a little older, and being a Southerner and having a little bit of an Appalachian accent like I do, they had it too, so
Yeah.
I think me and Bees, I really enjoy working with him because I love his crowds, and he's a really good guy. And I've been to his church down in Mobile, and it's you came down there, didn't you?
I did. Went to New Year's, decided to just take off and watch you guys did the New Year's show, and the band that was doing the music for a future podcast for him, his wife had sent me the music, and that was really cool to get to hear them play the song live. And you talk about worship, Michelle, man, this is they cater a lot to people in recovery. And I think, I mess up a Bible verse in a minute, but I know that, the Bible talks about people who've been forgiven of much, man. It's just different to be in the presence of people who have been down in some really difficult places, and God's rescued them. And there was this beautiful freedom and the way they just worshiped, bringing in the new year, and, dancing, singing, hands in the air, enjoyed a fun comedy show and just let loose for New Year's. It was really sweet. It's probably one of my favorite New Year's memories.
I don't think you could ever get out the memory of listening to all those banjos playing for worship music. I'm thinking it's not possible, right? No? You say you were down
no banjos.
No?
No banjos. No, you would think that there would be, but nope.
No, they were rocking. Were they not rocking, Dan? It was full on rocking for Jesus.
And I think they did communion at midnight, didn't they? Remember that?
Yeah, they did. That was a really, really cool experience. Really cool experience. And then I went to Dauphin Island and hung out for a couple of days and got to see some beautiful sunsets. So that was pretty awesome. I think, Dan, you've had such a great career. You've worked with so many awesome people. You're such a solid comedian, but for me, I've had the opportunity to just, in passing, feel like I became friends with you. I've got to watch you perform many times. I've now had the pleasure to work with you. And I just want you to know what an amazing reputation you have with comedians around Nashville. If your name is brought up, I've never heard anybody say a negative word about you. People love you. They love working with you. But I think a lot of it just has to do with the kind spirit that you have about you, and how you just make people feel seen and welcomed around you. So as somebody who, Nashville's a tough scene, and as somebody who, I'm not necessarily in with the in crowd, you have always made me just feel like another comedian and not an outsider. So I absolutely appreciate you for that. I truly appreciate you coming on and talking with us today. I wondered before you go if there's a new comedian coming on and listening to us. We have people who just listen because they're interested in comedy, but then there are some people who are listening for knowledge in the comedy industry. Is there a piece of advice, or is there something that you learned that you kind of carried throughout that you might be able to share with someone like that who's listening?
I would say, well, I'll tell you this about Janet Williams, because Janet Williams is a comedian who told me one time that she has never, ever been nervous. She has never had stage fright. Janet also went from open micer to headliner. She never featured, but it was because her material was so over the top. You know, nobody wants to follow that as a headliner. But I would say, do as clean as you can. And I love comedy, all kinds. I love dirty comedy, but it's going to hold you back. And until you get to be headliner, then do whatever you want. But I am totally ashamed of some of the jokes I did when I first started, because I was trying to shock, you know, as much as anything. And so I would advise against that, you know, trying to do shock comedy, because one day, you know, nowadays, especially with everything on the internet, your mom's eventually going to see it, you know. And the other thing is, you're not as bad as your worst set, and you're not as good as your best set. You're just kind of in there somewhere. So don't get too excited when it's you absolutely kill, and don't take it too bad when you bomb horribly. You know, it's part of it, and it's not the good part, but it's a part of it. I know B said one time, somebody asked him about comedy. He said, "How do you get to be a comedian?" And B said, "You go out and get your heart broke about 1,000 times. You know, you got to get out there and bite the bullet." And I know when I first started, I had a decent set the first time I went up. And I thought, that's unbelievable. First time I've ever done it, you know, and people were laughing and it felt great. And the second time I went up, it wasn't that good at all. And it really, then I was like, man, I'm quitting. I'm not going to put myself through this, because it tore me up. It just, I'm not going to put myself through this anymore. I'm going to do one more set and try to do a good one, and then I'm going to quit. And the next set was good. And I thought, well, you know, boy, that was fun. I want to do that again, you know, and then I'd have another bad one. Well, I got to have one more set to get this taste out of my mouth of this particular show. Then I'm going to quit. But anyway, it's 25 years now, and I'm still threatening to quit all the time, but I never do.
Well, Michelle, I think the watch your mouth, the dirty comedy, that was direct advice to you, because we know what a potty mouth you are.
Hey now, hey.
And the
You're right,
50-50 wanting to quit every other time, that's probably me.
Every
I feel
time.
like it's always a good show then a bad show. I'm still in that inconsistent, like, well, or no consistent. I'm consistently 50-50 on like, where I'm at. No, I think that's great advice, because we do people can let the good shows go to their head, and they can let the bad shows go to their heart. And it can make this what's supposed to be, we bring the funny, not fun for the comedian, if we allow that to play out in our heads. So I think that's absolutely great advice. What do you think, Michelle?
Oh, definitely. I love that. I love that, you know, you're not as bad as your worst set. You're not as good as your good set. I mean, I love that. It's so balanced. It's a balanced thinking. It's a balanced way of looking at entertainment. It's a balanced way of looking at life. And it sounds as if, Dan, since this is the first time I'm ever meeting you, it sounds as if you're a very even keeled kind of person, that, you know, you're not like, woo, or, huh, you know, it's just right there in the middle. And I love that. I love it so much. I do have a question.
Sure.
Have you ever done like any shows like in prisons or things like that? And then if you did, were any of the audience members like, dude, you were the one that arrested me? Like, was that ever a thing?
I have been offered a gig at a prison. Tom Sobel used to book one, and I think Nate Bargatze, a lot of really good comedians coming up, did prison shows. I turned it down because I was a prison guard before I was a police officer, and I just did not want to. I knew I'd be too nervous.
Mm.
I could see myself being taken captive. So if anybody stood up, I'd probably run off the stage. So I figured it wasn't worth it to me, because there is a possibility somebody being there that I did put in there. So I never did the prison gigs.
Wow. What if, like, I never would have thought about that, or even to ask that question, Michelle. That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, I don't blame you. I mean, you can do ministry in other ways, but that doesn't seem to be the wisest place in the world to be doing. I used to be a police officer jokes. Like, that's not where, I don't know. I think that was a wise decision that you made to not put yourself in that position. Cause when we die on stage, like, we just want that to not be literal. Like, if it happens, it needs to be figurative language. And like, that honestly could be a dangerous situation for you. So that's great. That blows my mind. I never thought about like that
When I was
situation.
When I was a prison guard, I remember there were multiple inmates who had tattoos that said, "I hate cops." So, I mean, that's a lot of commitment right there. So I don't want to, I never wanted to, give them the opportunity to get one.
Yes.
Yeah, that's smart. That's really, really smart. So thank you for answering that, because it just, I don't know, that was one of those things in my head, because like my mom was a police commissioner. And so like I'm very fond towards cops that do a great job. And I'm also, I also have this whole concept of ministry and that we're supposed to still minister to those that have made wrong choices. And so it was just that I was just wondering, like, okay, here's another one. While you're on stage and you have like a heckler, normally, the club is supposed to take care of like really bad out, crazy hecklers. So like when you first started, did you end up like, just calling that for like backup? You're like, hey dudes, come on over to the comedy club because so-and-so is going to be drunk when they drive. You know what I mean? Like, or did you make the arrest? I'm just curious.
I never wanted to deal with a heckler. Like, some comedians are really good about improv and crowd work and stuff. And I'm really more of a material driven comedian. So what I did is I wrote a bit out that I could use against a heckler that wasn't too, I don't want to hurt his feelings or anything, but it was something to shut him down. And what I did was I would say, if I started getting a heckler, I would say, look, the comedy club rules are there's no yelling at the comedian, there's no heckling. But I've talked to the owner, and what we decided we could do is we're going to suspend that rule. And I'm going to suspend that rule, and I'm going to let you heckle me, and I'm going to try to impress the crowd with my wit. And then I would just say, go ahead, let's hear it. And that right there would shut them down a lot of times, because all of a sudden everybody's looking at them. And now they're under the pressure I was feeling just a second ago. And some of them can't do it, but some of them can. And the ones that could, they would yell something, whatever, you're horrible, whatever. And I would look up like I was thinking, and then I would say, okay, I don't have one for that. And I would say, another one. And if they did another one, I would say, okay, well, I don't have one for that either. I tell you what, we're not going to play that game anymore. And then I would reiterate that you're not supposed to heckle in a club, and that usually worked. And also, I had another line I would throw in when I told them, go ahead and give me your best shot. And I would, if they hesitated for a second, I would say, "Here's your one chance, fancy. Don't let me down." And that plus I'm fancy. So, but yeah, my heckler shutdown thing was all pre-scripted, and that's what I used. I did see Nate Bargatze one time, and I thought, because I was wondering, there was some people talking, and I could see it was distracting him, and I was wondering, man, how would he handle? I'm fixing to see how he handles this, and he just looked over at him and said, "Stop talking." And I thought, well, that was effective and right to the point.
I'll try that next time. I've had that moment a couple times. I think I'll just try that. I'll just stop and say, "Stop talking."
I love that Reba McEntire got her song from you, from your line.
Right.
Fancy, don't let me down.
That's crazy. That's crazy. Well, Dan, we are so appreciative that you came on and hung out with us today. Michelle is scrolling at the bottom of the screen the ways that you can find Dan Whitehurst. Now, we just heard Dusty Slay set him up a YouTube channel. So whatever Dusty put on there back in the day, it might be the only thing you find, right, Dan?
I might need to find that thing.
But you can find Dan at danwhitehurstcomedy.com. He's on Facebook at dan.whitehurst.52 and Instagram. He's Boomer Dan Whitehurst. So definitely check him out on social media, y'all. If you see him doing a show in your area, you definitely want to check out Dan Whitehurst. He is absolutely funny. As I said, our friend Johnny W. called him one of his favorite storytellers of all time. And he's absolutely phenomenal. So again, check him out. Dan Whitehurst. It's HURST comedy.com. And Dan, man, we appreciate you being here. It's been awesome having you, Michelle.
Well, yes, so much
for having me.
Awesome. So Michelle's she's gonna kick you backstage where you were eating all the snacks before. If you want to hang out, we'll give you a proper goodbye. But if you gotta go, we totally understand. But thank you again for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. Y'all were great.
All right, Van Dusen. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize you had not met Dan before. Normally, backstage before we get started, I will say, Dan, this is my friend Michelle. And we always introduce. And in my mind, I just felt like that you should have already known Dan and that he should already have known you. So I'm sorry for that.
No, I've never met him. I actually have never heard any of his comedy. I'm looking forward to hearing him. I mean, because especially when he said, that his material, his shows, it's material driven. And I love that. I love the one-liners. I love that kind of style. And so I'm looking forward so much. I can't wait for his stuff to be out on Amazon Prime and all that. So
yeah, I tell you, he has a unique rhythm, and he's one of those people that you just lean in, man. You just lean in. He's pretty awesome. So Michelle, really quick, the tip of the week, June's tip of the week is what if? What if? I'm trying to read it. ADHD. I tell you, and then I forget by the end of the show what it was going to be. What if? Okay, so it's two different things. So in comedy writing, I was thinking about this week, is once I write a bit, I'm now writing the word what if. Mm-hmm. So let's say that in the situation, at the end of my story, I fall down, right? So what if I didn't fall down? Or what if, right? So I'm writing what if at the end of different bits to take myself in different directions. So what if I wasn't angry? What if I was sad? What if I was embarrassed? What if I was amused? And so I know that people connect with emotions. And so I'm trying to just put a what if at the end of bits and see, can I go a different direction with it?
What if an elephant stormed in? What if a
Yes.
cat jumped on your head? What if your dog ran away? Okay, I
Yes.
see. I see.
Yeah.
Oh,
But
you're going with
more
emotion.
along the lines of something that's already written. What
Yeah.
if? So, for
Yeah.
example, the hair catching on fire bit that I do, right? So, what if we were still driving down the road? Or what if I was by myself when that happened? What if, right? So it's
Mhm.
just taking something that you've already written and seeing if you could go a different direction with it. The other is more of an emotional thing. So
Yeah.
we talked about this the other day about in our bombing podcast. I have a tendency of thinking of the worst case scenarios,
Mhm.
right? So whenever I get ready to go do something, I'm always thinking, what if this happens? What if that happens? But it's always negative. So I want to encourage our listeners in life, in comedy, maybe take a beat and think, well, what if it's something good? Rather than what if it's something negative? And interactions with people, what if they were just having a bad day and it's not personal against me, right? What if? So I say leave your options open, and maybe just give yourself a what if something is going to turn out good rather than something turning out bad. So what if, hey Michelle, what if our friends who listen to the Laugh Support podcast started following us on our personal social media? That would be awesome. Hey guys, you can find me at June Bug Comedy on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. It's all June Bug Comedy. And if you want to follow Michelle, it's you can find her on her website, michellevandusen.org, and then on Facebook and Instagram and all of those platforms, you can find Michelle at Michelle's Comedy. Is that right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Michelle's Comedy. And remember, it's Michelle with one L. Michelle, I thought at one point you were asking Dan a question, and I thought you were teeing up one of your horrible jokes, and I almost went, "Don't do it, Dan! Don't do it!" But then you didn't. You didn't make us go through that. Are we going to get through this episode without a bad joke?
Well, I actually did have one more question for him. I wanted to know, why was the cello player arrested?
So we're not going to get through without a bad joke. Go ahead. Why was the cello player arrested?
Because she got in trouble.
I'm so glad he didn't have to be in here for that moment. She got in trouble. Friends, I love you. Thank you for listening. Jesus and Jude loves you. Michelle, tell him you're sorry and tell him goodbye.
I'm not going to say I'm sorry. Thank you for listening, and we will catch you the next time. Bye-bye.